Right, this video comes from a question, one of our customers actually, a recent or new owner of a Y62 Patrol, and he picked his car up from us a little while ago, and he came back and said, out of interest, when I'm towing my caravan, he's got a 2.5 ton caravan, what gear should I tow in? And I thought this was a question that is worth a bit of a discussion and a video, because I explained my thoughts to him, and at the end of it went, I should really tell everyone what my thoughts are about this. And as I say this, because I think my thoughts are going to be controversial, these are just my thoughts. This is my opinion of driving Y62s for the last 8 years, towing. My old van was just under 3 ton. My new van is just over 3 ton. I've towed with 33-inch tyres, 35s, 37s, with and without diff gears. I've got some experience in it, and I think I've got some understanding on how these cars work. So this is my opinion, and you know, at the moment my car's got, I'm about to go away for a trip. I'm just about to put the bush barriers on, going to Mount Cold next weekend for Australia Day, and I've got a choice. I was going to put on my 37s because that is a place that would really appreciate a bigger tyre because it's all rutted out. However, towing the van is a headache on 37s because you don't want to, well, it's not that you don't want to put diff gears in a Series 5 Patrol, but there's some considerations because if you put diff gears in a Series 5 or any of the series that have radar cruise control, then the cruise control stops working at 100 kilometers an hour. Works up to 99, 100 and over, it doesn't work at all. And I like to tow it speeds above 100, so that's not going to happen. But putting 35s on, I think isn't too bad. It's like as far as you would want to go without doing diff gears. And for some reason I have less trouble with my Series 5 than my Series 1. I think that's just me though. So when you put 35s on, each gear gets longer. The gearbox gets a little bit messed up, and as you start to go up an incline, it wants to change back. So you'll notice the people that are really asking this question are the ones with bigger tyres, because if you just leave 33s on, they tow brilliantly, to be honest, and you don't have to stuff around with the gearbox too much. But when you're on bigger tyres, as soon as you get to a bit of an incline with a van on, it wants to drop back a gear and it kicks back. This particular one's supercharged, so let's say it's in 6th gear and I'm in just D for drive, and there's demand for more torque because we're starting to go up a hill. It wants to kick back to 5th, but then because the supercharger uses power to make power, there isn't enough there, so it demands more torque again, and it goes back another gear, and that's when these things start, like the clutches and the gearbox start free spinning, and that's when your supercharged cars burn out gearboxes. So on one hand you want to keep it in manual mode, and I'll talk about why you don't want to keep it in manual mode coming up. So that's one part of it. The gearbox, so it's a 7-speed gearbox. 5th gear is 1:1, and all the old school people know that, you know, your dad always told you to tow in a 1:1 ratio. So 5th gear is 1:1 on 33s. So any gear above that, 6th and 7th, which are pretty close together to be honest, they're an overdrive gear. And if your car is going to have any trouble at all with any type of catalytic converter code, O2 sensor codes, I've even had weird battery codes come up. They will always show themselves when you're in 6th or 7th gear, an overdrive gear, because the car wants to protect itself. These things are smarter than you'd think. And as soon as it finds just a little thing wrong and you're in an overdrive gear, that's when it will throw an engine light. So if you're finding you've thrown an engine light and it's not there all the time, it's probably when you're in an overdrive gear, and that's the poor little, you know, engine and gearbox trying to protect itself. So you want to have some sort of a code reader if you go away. This one, a mate of mine bought one and ended up with 2. This is just a cheapy $85 King's code reader, scan gauge thing. You can reset codes and it tells you a bunch of other stuff. Engine coolant temp, oil temp. This one doesn't do trans temp. I wish it did. If you're going to go buy one, I would strongly suggest finding one that does trans temps. But the most important thing, if you're going to head out in a Y62 and do anything sort of remote, regional, you need to be able to clear a code, because when it goes into a limp mode, you're stuffed. So to be able to get one of these, it usually sits on the dash and I can clear a code. They're great, and I like the size of it. It's not too big. I can put it on the dash. It doesn't block out any of the other gauges. I've seen some other bigger ones, colored screens, U-boot, everything, but like to put them somewhere, it creates another blind spot. And when you've got, you know, a mirror and say a tow mirror clipped onto it, there's so many blind spots. And I've got a Safety Dave camera here, you're occluding all of your view. So I actually don't mind the smaller, cheaper ones. So that clips in over here, and it's got an OBD cord that goes into the into the OBD 2 port. All right, we digress. Let's get back to talking about towing. So again, this is my understanding of what the Gearbox wants to do. When you're going up a hill with the van on and you're in drive, the car is having a look at all the things. And I only learned that by reading this. So this tells you what the load is, temperatures, all of that, and it actually assesses what the air intake temperature is, what the coolant temp is, sees if it's at a point where it needs to drop back a gear, because when you've got more revs, you've got the fan going harder and it's flowing better and it's less load on the engine. So the Gearbox ECU is thinking about all of this before it even decides to change gear. And it might say on a really hot day, it might change gears back quicker than on, you know, a normal cool day. If the engine coolant temp is already at 105, it will probably want to, when there's a demand for more torque, it will drop back quicker and get to a higher revving thing. So there's a lot to take in. If you put it in manual mode, you flick it over into fifth at 1:1, that means you're the brains now, and you have to make a judgment call on, you know, is the car gonna get hot because I'm holding in fifth? So, and say you're sitting on 100 k's an hour and you start to see, and you're on cruise control, or you can't hold 100 anymore because you've got to put your foot down more, and the speed's starting to drop, that's a fair indication that it's at 100% load. If you've got one of these, it will tell you, but it's at 100% load, and if you hold it in that gear and you don't do anything about it and the speed starts dropping off, the car, the only control it's got, because you've got it in, you locked in a gear, is to start changing the fuel map. And because it's getting hot, it wants to preserve itself, so it would dump more fuel in. Fuel is a lubricant, fuel is a coolant, but it will use more, it will richen things up and use more fuel. So that's the only control it's got left. So yeah, you start to go up a hill, it's cruising along in fifth gear, it's starting to drop off. By throwing more fuel in, you're going to make less power, so you're not going to get like the speed that you're hoping for. And this is what this customer actually said. He was going up Wollonga Hill towing his van, and he was barely getting 60 kilometers an hour at the top of it. And I've done that hill with my van on. I could do it at 100 k's an hour, drop it back a gear to third or even second, and off you go. So now that I know the car really well, I'm kind of confident to do some manual, hold it in manual at times. And I can see on here, if the load hits 100%, I gotta back it down a gear. In fact, even if it gets to about 80% load, I'll drop it down a gear, and that keeps everything cool. Because I've watched this, I've played around with it, I've held it in gears, and you watch the temp, 100, 103, 105, 107, and I even let it go to 110 once. I'm like, no, the car is upset with things, it's getting hotter. Flick it over into upper gear, straight away, instantly, you see the temps start coming down. I can only see engine temp on this, but I could only imagine what the trans temps are doing too. I bet that's getting hot. Another example, when we went away with Steve recently, I was in drive, he was in holding in fifth, we're doing a big incline, and I don't know if this is coincidental or not, but that's when his supercharger belt started to let go, engine lights came on, it lit up like a Christmas tree, power was dropping off, it went into like a limp mode, and it turned out the belt had frayed, and it was catching things on the way. I think it caught the viscous fan wiring, kicked that out, then all the engine lights came on. Was that related to holding in fifth? Or I don't know, but I do think him going up a hill, holding it in fifth, and not being able to hold the speed was generating excess heat. And on these cars, the temp gauge is near useless. It sits at half no matter what you do. Even when it goes up to 110 degrees, it's barely above half when you're looking at the temp. So the dash as an indicator is poor. You really need to have something that you can look at all of these things live, especially if you're even considering putting into, you know, manual mode. So how do I drive my car? Hooked up the van, I'm all comfy. I actually keep it in drive. That's what I do. If I know a hill's coming up and I'm alert and I can read what this is doing, I'll flick it over and I might drop it back from, you know, fifth to fourth, and I'll pick the gear I need to be in at the bottom of the hill for what I need at the top of the hill. Same as four-wheel driving, like on sand. So if I know that this is a fourth gear hill, I'll put it in fourth at the bottom of the hill. And that means I'm not changing gears when it's at 100% load. That's like the time where it's going to hurt most, when it has to change gear. If I'm going up Mount Barker and I've got the Mount Barker freeway and I've got some mechanical sympathy, I know these cars will sit on 85 k's an hour all day in third gear. It's not revving its head off, it stays nice and cool, never gets hot, and just up she goes. Whereas if you try and hold it in fourth, and Steve did this on our trip recently, it did, and his air conditioner kicked out. That's the first indication that your car's getting hot, when the aircon stops. So that's a third gear. When I start it at the bottom, right down at the lights, and I do it the whole way up until I get past that full drive park up there. So if I'm a bit dopey and I'm not alert, I still leave it in drive, because the car will do that calculation for me. It'll look at all the temps, the load, and it will say, yep, we need to drop back to fifth or fourth gear. As soon as it does it, I push it across and hold it in that gear, and then I'm alert and I start looking at this on the dash, and I look at the load and look at the temps and make sure it's doing all the things right. If the temps are going up, I need to back off the throttle, or I need to change it to another gear. But I don't let it, when I throw it over into manual mode, I don't let it kick down twice, because that's when it starts to free spool the clutches. I'm near 7 ton, supercharge, it'll fry the clutches and you're done. Another time where I might hold it in gear is if you're, you know, going up a bumpy road. It might be flat, but it's really bumpy and it just always wants to change and get upset. Stuff it. I know this is the right gear, fifth gear, then I hold it there, and when the bumps are gone, I put it back into manual. If I'm going through the hills and it's windy, and it's trying to just fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, fourth, fifth, and jumping up and down, then I'll change it into manual mode. I'll hold it in fourth or something like that, and I'll control it until the windy bit's finished, then I'll put it back into drive. If you ever had to choose whether to put it in a gear and let it labour at lower revs, or pick a high, even though you might think, oh, this is too high, it's revving at like 4,000, that's too much, always go the higher gear, because that's going to create more airflow and it's going to keep temps down. Alright, so that's my little rant and answer to that question and my opinion, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of you out there that will argue with everything that I just said, but that's my opinion. No one can argue though. If you own a Y62 and you're going out of phone reception, you need some sort of a code reader, whether it's 85 bucks from King's or like 400 and something bucks scan gauge. Really, we all need one of them if we're towing, so we can monitor all this stuff and we can pick up on it before you break something. It'd be, you know, hindsight's a wonderful thing. Would Steve have done his belt if he had one of these code readers and left it in a lower gear? We'll never know, but it's a good campfire chat nonetheless. Alright, we're out for this week, and actually there'll be another sneaky vid midweek I reckon, but the big one will be next weekend at Mount Cole. There's a bunch of us going up there and we'll do all the crazy stuff that we do when we go to Mount Cole. It's a fun place to go. Alright, see you next time on YouTube. Yeah.